A wounded boy is found hiding in the snow with only a mysterious dog by his side. But this is no ordinary dog, and the boy carries secrets he doesn't even know he holds. When Officer Dean Walker takes them in, he uncovers a buried program, a vanished scientist, and a truth so powerful it could collapse entire systems. What begins as a rescue turns into a race against a shadow network desperate to reclaim what they lost. With danger closing in, the bond between the boy and his dog becomes the last line of hope. This is the story of Bramble and the Echo. A thin whimper broke the stillness of Elk Hollow's forest fringe just past midnight. Officer Dean Walker sat quietly in his patrol car, the engine off, the windows down. The air carried the scent of wet pine and cold earth, dampened by 5 nights of scattered rain. His flashlight lay across his lap, untouched, as he stared into the darkness that had yielded nothing but silence for the past week. Until now. Why? The missing boy, Ethan Moore, had vanished 6 days ago without a trace. No signs of struggle, no surveillance footage, just an empty red backpack found by the edge of Willow Creek. Dean had been the first on scene and had returned every night since, pulled not by protocol but by something deeper. His own son, Aaron, had been 10 when he died. Ethan was 10 too. The case clung to Dean like wet wool, heavy and full of ghosts. He leaned forward, the creak of the leather seat loud in the stillness. The sound came again. Not the cry of an animal, not the rustling of branches, but a deliberate, soft whimper that cut through the trees like breath on frosted glass. Dean stepped out, hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. His boots sank slightly into the moss-covered ground as he moved toward the sound, flashlight finally activated and sweeping left to right in slow arcs. A glint of amber light reflected from within the underbrush. Dean froze. 2 golden eyes stared back at him, low to the ground but calm. A dog. A large one. Not a stray. Not feral. Its fur was thick, mottled in dark brown and gray, and its body was tense yet controlled. It didn't bark. It didn't move. It just watched him. Dean lowered the beam slightly, speaking softly. "Hey there, you okay, boy? You out here alone?" The dog tilted its head slightly, then looked behind it into the woods, then back at Dean, then back again. Dean frowned. "You want me to follow you?" It was a statement, not a question. The dog turned and began to walk. Not fast, not afraid. Measured steps, each one deliberate. Dean hesitated for only a second before following. His light cut through dense ferns and branches, catching glimpses of the dog's form as it moved silently ahead. Occasionally it would stop, glance back to ensure Dean was still behind, then proceed. After several minutes, the terrain dipped slightly. A shallow hollow, shielded by toppled trees and tangled shrubs, opened up like a forgotten pocket of the forest. There, barely visible in the circle of his flashlight's glow, was a child. Curled up beneath a threadbare blanket, motionless save for a faint trembling in his shoulders. His small hands clutched a tattered stuffed animal and the unmistakable red backpack Dean had seen in the case file photo. Dean's breath caught. Ethan. He dropped to one knee, his voice breaking. "Ethan Moore?" The boy stirred, slowly. Dirt streaked across his cheeks, his lips pale. He blinked up at the light, confusion clouding his gaze. "Are you one of the good people?" The question sliced through Dean like a whisper through smoke. He took off his hat and set it on the ground beside him. "Yeah, kid, I'm here to bring you home." The boy's eyes flickered to the dog, who now sat quietly between them, a silent sentinel. "He kept me safe. He never left." Dean turned toward the animal. "Who are you, boy?" The dog didn't respond, of course, but his posture was military precise, protective, aware, like he had been trained for moments exactly like this. Dean radioed for backup, his voice steady but urgent. Paramedics and officers converged on the site within minutes, but none could coax the dog to move until the boy gave a single word. "Bramble. It's okay. They're the good people." Only then did the dog shift, slowly standing and stepping aside. The paramedics approached cautiously. Officer Jenkins whispered as he watched the dog with wide eyes. "That's not just any dog." Dean nodded slowly, eyes still on Bramble. "No, that's someone's soldier." As the EMTs lifted Ethan onto a stretcher, the boy reached back for the dog's neck. "Don't let them take him. He's mine. He knows things. He knows the bad men are still looking for me. Dean's heart thudded. He placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. He's not going anywhere. Neither am I. Bramble stood silently beside them as they began the walk back to the road. And Dean Walker knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. The morning after Ethan was found, the sky over Elk Hollow was a muted silver, the kind of overcast that blurred the edges of reality and memory. Officer Dean Walker stood outside the veterinary clinic on East Cedar Street, watching through the frosted glass as the dog Bramble was examined by Dr. Mel Tran. The boy was safe now, resting under observation at County General, but the questions were multiplying faster than answers. Dean's mind spun with the fragments Ethan had whispered between sips of warm broth and fevered sleep. He found food for me. He knew where to hide when the men came back. He wouldn't let me talk when it was dangerous. And the one that had stuck in Dean's head like a splinter. He remembers things people forget. Inside, Dr. Tran finished cleaning a long, shallow wound on Bramble's left flank. The dog didn't flinch. He didn't growl or resist. He simply stared at the wall, breathing slowly, as if waiting for something. Dean stepped in as the vet removed her gloves. "This is not a stray," Dean said, keeping his voice low. He sat in the corner, arms crossed, still in uniform. "He's trained. Not just obedience school trained, military trained." Tran nodded, wiping her hands. "I ran a microchip scan. Nothing. No ID. No registration. No name on record. But you're right. The way he carries himself, the way he responds to voice tones, nonverbal cues, this is a working dog." Dean approached Bramble slowly. The dog lifted his head but didn't move. Dean crouched, their eyes meeting. "Who were you with?" he asked quietly. "What did they teach you to do?" Bramble blinked. His expression was unreadable but calm, like he was holding onto a memory that couldn't yet be translated into words. Dean reached out, his fingers brushing the side of the dog's thick neck. He felt something small and irregular beneath the fur, a scar, circular, just behind the jawline, too precise for a natural wound. A microchip removed. Dean stood. Whoever trained him didn't want him traced. Later that day, Dean sat at his desk in the small police station, a steaming mug of black coffee forgotten at his elbow. Files were spread across his workspace: missing persons, K-9 retirements, private military contractor reports, everything he could access within the public and restricted databases. He wasn't just chasing the story of a dog anymore. He was tracing the outline of something buried. Across the street, at the hospital, Ethan lay asleep under warmed blankets. A nurse had taped his drawings to the wall. In the center was one that caught Dean's attention earlier, a crude crayon sketch of a gray and brown dog standing in front of a door marked Unit 7. Beneath it, the words, "Safe here." That same phrase had appeared in the corner of another file Dean had pulled from the Federal Archives, a redacted case involving a defunct military intelligence project called Sentinel Initiative. It had been shut down 5 years ago after allegations of trauma-inducing training regimens applied to both handlers and animals. A location was listed once before being blacked out: Unit 7, Drywell Base, New Mexico. Dean leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. What the hell did they do to you? He pulled up internal records and found what he was hoping for, a name he hadn't seen in years. Lieutenant Arlen Voss. Former K-9 commander, now working under private contract in Oregon's Eastern Security District. His last known location was a logistics company posing as a wildlife monitoring station just 2 hours from Elk Hollow. Dean rose from his desk, grabbing his coat. Before he left, he stopped by the clinic to see Bramble again. The dog was sitting up now, eyes alert, tail still. As Dean entered, Bramble stood not aggressively, but in that same way soldiers rise when a superior enters the room. "You want to come for a ride?" Dean asked. Bramble didn't move. Dean tried again, softer. "You know where Unit 7 is, don't you?" This time, Bramble stepped forward. Back in the cruiser, with Bramble sitting silently in the back seat, Dean started the engine and pulled out of town. The road stretched eastward, winding through patches of redwood and open fields, the radio silent. The only sound was the steady hum of tires on asphalt. Dean glanced in the rearview mirror. Bramble's eyes were on the horizon. Whatever secrets this dog carried, they were leading him somewhere. And Dean was ready to follow. The road narrowed into gravel as Dean's cruiser passed the old timber sign reading Northland Wildlife Monitoring Station. Authorized personnel only. Beyond it stretched a fence line that looked more military than environmental. Tall chain link topped with rusting barbed wire, cameras mounted discreetly along posts, and a security shack that had clearly seen upgrades in the last few years. This was no wildlife outpost. Dean slowed as he approached the entrance. Bramble, silent in the back seat, lifted his head, eyes sharp. He hadn't barked or growled once during the 2-hour drive, but now he stood, body tense, ears rotating slowly. Not fear, alertness. A guard in his 50s stepped out of the shack, wearing a gray parka and mirrored sunglasses. He waved half-heartedly, then noticed the police cruiser and hesitated. "Can I help you?" the guard asked as Dean rolled down the window. Dean held up his badge. "Officer Dean Walker, Elk Hollow PD. I'm looking for someone I believe works here. Former Lieutenant Arlen Voss." The guard's smile thinned. "Don't think I know that name." Dean leaned forward slightly. "You sure? Because his last listed employer was this facility, under a contract with Provox Security. That ring a bell?" The guard stepped back. "I'll check with my supervisor. Wait here." He disappeared inside, closing the shack door. Dean sat in silence, staring ahead, but his eyes tracked every movement. A red light blinked on one of the fence cameras. Bramble had shifted again in the back, now pacing in the tight space, then pressing in the tuft to the window. Seconds later, the guard returned. "You can drive in. Building 3. Park outside. Wait to be called." Dean nodded, masking the churn in his gut. He knew military bureaucracy well enough to recognize a stall tactic, but he also knew the value of playing along until it was time not to. The gates opened with a mechanical buzz. He drove slowly past tall pine trees and low concrete buildings that looked far too reinforced for anything involving deer counts or nesting birds. Bramble sat again but didn't relax. His head turned, eyes tracking something Dean couldn't see. Building 3 loomed ahead, long, windowless, with an electronic keypad at the entrance. Dean parked, clipped his badge back onto his jacket, and opened the back door for Bramble. "Let's see who remembers you," he murmured. As soon as Bramble stepped onto the pavement, he stopped, nose in the air. Then he turned sharply and trotted toward the rear of the building. "Bramble, hold up," Dean called, following. But the dog didn't stop. They rounded the side and came upon a locked steel door, paint chipping along the frame. Bramble sat in front of it, tail still, staring at the door with absolute focus. Dean tried the handle. Locked. He knocked once, twice. No answer. Just as he turned to head back, the door clicked. It creaked open a few inches. A woman with short auburn hair and deep lines around her mouth peered out. She wore a gray technician's uniform and looked at Dean, not with confusion, but recognition. "You're with the boy," she said flatly. Dean paused. "What boy?" She opened the door wider, eyes moving to Bramble. Her breath caught. "He's still alive." Bramble stepped forward and gently nosed her hand. She dropped to her knees and hugged him, not out of joy, but like someone clinging to the last thread of something broken. "He found him, didn't he?" she whispered. Dean crouched beside her. "I need to speak with someone in charge. Someone who knows what this place really is." The woman looked up, eyes narrowed. "Do you want to help that kid? Then you need to know why he was taken." Dean froze. "Taken?" She stood, motioning them inside. "I'm not supposed to talk. But after what they did to us, what they did to him, I'll take the risk." Inside, the hallway was sterile and cold, fluorescent lights flickering above. She led them past locked rooms and sealed windows until they reached an unmarked door. A biometric scanner blinked beside it. She reached into her sleeve, pulled a small plastic keycard, and swiped it. The door opened to a room filled with rows of dusty file cabinets and 2 aging computer terminals. A faint hum of static filled the air. "You were right about Arlen Voss," she said. "But he's not in charge anymore. After Sentinel shut down, he went freelance. Some of the dogs were reassigned. Others weren't so lucky." She walked to a filing cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a thin file marked K9C47, Bramble. She handed it to Dean. He flipped it open. Inside was a photo Bramble, younger but unmistakable. His handler, a name Dean didn't recognize. Notes on training in threat recognition, signal-based navigation, and an underlined term Dean had only seen once before. Cognitive retention beyond imprint protocol. Dean looked up. What does that mean? She hesitated. It means he remembers. Not just faces or voices. Emotions, events, orders never given. It's what made him dangerous. Dangerous to who? She stared at the file. To the people who built him. Bramble stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Dean. And Dean understood this wasn't just a rescue. It was a return. Something was coming. The air in the archive room was thick with the scent of old paper and burned-out electronics. Officer Dean Walker stood motionless, eyes fixed on the documents in his hands. Bramble sat beside him like a statue, the hum of the fluorescent light above casting a pale wash over the file labeled Key 9C47. The more Dean read, the more the pieces began to slide into place, not neatly, but with the jarring crunch of truth long buried and never meant to surface. The woman, whose name tag read M. Hawthorne, moved through the room with the nervous energy of someone who'd spent too many years waiting for a knock that never came. She handed Dean a second file, thinner but heavier somehow, marked C21E. He opened it slowly. Inside was a black and white photograph of a 5-year-old boy, his name redacted but followed by a familiar string of dates and biometric data. The date of birth matched Ethan Moore's exactly. Dean's breath caught. What is this? It's what started all of it, Hawthorne said quietly. He wasn't just a random victim, officer. Ethan was born inside the Sentinel Initiative. His parents escaped when the project was shut down, changed names, relocated. But you can't erase genetics. And you can't outrun a contract signed before a child was even born. Dean's mind reeled. You're telling me his parents were part of this? She nodded. Ethan's mother was a neuroscientist, his father, military intelligence. They were assigned to Sentinel to oversee Phase 2 testing if trauma-responsive memory could be passed genetically to offspring. The idea was that children raised under controlled conditions might retain tactical instincts without ever setting foot in a war zone. She paused, eyes darkening. Ethan wasn't supposed to survive past infancy, but they saved him, smuggled him out during the collapse. Dean looked at Bramble. And him? He was one of the last. The only one that didn't break. Break? The others either shut down or became unstable. Bramble adapted. He didn't follow orders blindly. He assessed, he adjusted, he protected. Not just on command. He decided who was worth protecting. Dean exhaled, stepping away from the cabinet. So what happened? Why now? The project had quiet funding up until last year. When it dried up, people started tying up loose ends. Ethan was a loose end. One that could expose everything. And someone, maybe more than one person, wants that data buried permanently. Even if it means taking out a child. A hard knock at the door made all three of them freeze. Hawthorne's hand darted to the light switch. She whispered, "Stay quiet," and everything went dark. Footsteps echoed outside the room, heavy and deliberate. Dean drew his weapon but kept it low. Bramble didn't bark. He moved toward the door in silence, nose twitching once, then twice, then looking back at Dean with an expression that could only mean one thing, not friendly. The footsteps paused, then turned away. A faint buzz. A door opened down the hall, then slammed shut. The silence that followed was louder than the footsteps. Hawthorne clicked the light back on. They're inside. Someone followed you. You need to get out of here. Dean holstered his weapon. We're taking these. Everything on Bramble and Ethan. She didn't argue. Instead, she shoved a flash drive into his hand. It's all backed up here, plus something else. A map. Not to where Ethan is now, to where he needs to go. Dean pocketed the drive. What does that mean? It means your job isn't over. It means someone planned for this plan for Bramble to survive, for Ethan to be found, for you to be the one to connect the dots. She stared at him. If you leave now, they'll come after you. Both of you. And that boy. She turned to Bramble. He knows where to go. But you'll have to trust him. Dean opened the door carefully, peeking out. The hallway was clear, but tension hung like static in the air. As they moved, Bramble led the way, nose low, body poised like a wire pulled tight. They passed labs sealed with keypads, offices with paper still curling in printers, the detritus of a facility abandoned in everything but purpose. Outside, the gray sky had darkened to steel. As they neared the cruiser, Dean spotted a black SUV parked near the exit gate. Engine off. Tinted windows. Too clean. He didn't hesitate. Bramble, in. The dog leapt into the back seat just as Dean slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and they peeled out onto the gravel path. As they passed the SUV, Dean caught movement in the rearview mirror. A door opened. A figure stepped out, lifted a phone to his ear, and turned just enough for Dean to glimpse his face. It was someone Dean had seen before, not in person, in an internal affairs report buried 3 years ago. Former military. Now security consultant for several black-budget defense contracts. Bramble barked once, not aggressive, warning. Dean floored it. They wouldn't get a second chance. Back on the main road, Dean finally breathed. He reached over, resting a hand on Bramble's back. "Okay, soldier," he said softly. "Wherever you're taking me, I'm ready." And Bramble, without hesitation, laid his head down but kept his eyes open, watching the road. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the mist rising off the pines as the cruiser carved a path deeper into the wilderness. Dean didn't speak. Neither did Bramble. The radio stayed off, the signal gone before the first bend in the road. The GPS on his dash blinked twice, then cut to black. It didn't matter. They weren't following a map. They were following memory. Bramble sat motionless in the back seat, ears high, posture alert. Occasionally he would shift, pressing against the window as if checking landmarks. Dean had driven countless backroads during his career, but nothing about this road felt familiar. Yet Bramble seemed to know it intimately, like someone following the echo of something buried. They reached a fork where the pavement ended. A rusted sign tilted sideways. Service Road 47 billion. No maintenance beyond this point. Dean glanced into the rearview mirror. Bramble was already standing. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, flanked by towering trees and thick underbrush. After nearly an hour, Dean spotted something that didn't belong: a wooden gate, half-rotted, covered in moss, hanging off one hinge. Beyond it, a narrow path barely wide enough for the cruiser. He stopped, engine idling. Bramble leapt from the back seat before Dean could even open the door. The dog didn't wait. He trotted down the overgrown trail with purpose. Dean followed on foot, hand instinctively brushing against the holster at his hip. The trail opened into a clearing. And there it was. A small stone cabin, swallowed by vines and shadows, nestled between two ancient oaks. The chimney stood intact, a tin roof rusted with time. The front door hung open, creaking gently in the wind. No footprints. No tire marks. But Bramble walked up the porch and crossed the threshold like returning to a childhood home. Dean followed him inside. The air was stale but not abandoned. Dust had settled over everything, but nothing was broken or vandalized. A cot in the corner, a wood stove cold but intact, and a desk near the window with something that drew Dean's eyes instantly: a small silver lockbox, untouched by time. Bramble sat beside it, looking up at Dean. Dean knelt, checked the box. No keyhole. Instead, a thin slit barely wider than a fingertip. He pulled the flash drive from his jacket and held it up. Bramble tilted his head. Dean hesitated, then walked to the desk drawer. Inside, hidden beneath a stack of yellowed maps, was an adapter. Not standard, military grade. The flash drive slid in with a soft click. A red light blinked once, twice. Then a quiet mechanical hum. The box unlocked. Inside lay a folder marked E-Show, sealed in plastic. Next to it, a voice recorder, and underneath, a photograph. Dean lifted it slowly. A woman in her early 30s. Kind eyes. Strong jawline. Hair pulled back. She stood in front of the very same cabin, one hand resting on Bramble's back. The other hand held a child, no older than 5. Ethan. Dean sat down. He pressed play. The woman's voice filled the room, clear despite the years. If you're hearing this, it means the fail-safes were triggered. My name is Dr. Claire Marine. I was lead neurologist on Sentinel Initiative PACE-II. Ethan is my son. I engineered his cognitive architecture, what we called ECHO, to store encrypted memory triggers in his subconscious. Bramble is his key. Dean leaned forward. His heart thudded in rhythm with her words. They're not just after the boy to silence him. They need him. Because inside him, inside his buried memories, are the final logs. Data I couldn't transmit without exposing him. That's why we built this place. Why Bramble was trained not to forget. The message crackled for a moment, then continued. They'll try again. When they do, Ethan won't understand why he's afraid. Why he dreams of fire. Of names he's never heard. But Bramble will. He's the last sentinel. And if you're the one protecting him, whoever you are, listen to me closely. Her voice lowered. Trust the boy. Trust the dog. Don't trust the system. And whatever you do, don't let them take him to Arlington. The recording ended in silence. Dean sat still, the words echoing in his bones. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows through the cracked window panes. Bramble walked to the door and stood watch. Back at the hospital, Ethan was asleep. But somewhere in that sleep, a new dream stirred of pine trees and stone cabins, of a dog always at his side, and of a voice he didn't remember knowing. Dean rose from the chair. He knew what had to be done. They weren't going back to Elk Hollow. They were going forward. The tires screeched against the pavement as Dean's cruiser pulled into the back lot of County General. The sun had barely broken the horizon, casting faint streaks of gold through the gray sky, but the hospital already buzzed with quiet tension. Dean's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Bramble, seated beside him now, was still and alert, his eyes fixed on the rear entrance, as if he sensed something before Dean did. Dean hadn't slept. After listening to the message in the cabin twice, he'd packed the lockbox, the file, and the recorder, then driven non-stop through the forest roads until the town emerged like a ghost from the mist. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't trust the lines anymore. Everything felt compromised, except the boy and the dog. As they stepped through the staff entrance, Bramble hesitated just long enough to sniff the floor, then let out a low, almost imperceptible growl. Dean's instincts surged. Something was wrong. Inside the pediatric wing, the lights were too bright, the halls too quiet. The nurse station was empty. Dean moved faster. Room 204 was at the far end of the corridor. He turned the corner and froze. The door stood open. He drew his weapon instinctively, moving low and quiet. Bramble stayed close to his side, posture rigid, breathing slow and controlled. Dean reached the doorway and peered in. Ethan sat on the hospital bed, eyes wide, clutching a pillow to his chest. Beside him stood a man in a dark gray suit, back turned, holding something in his hand, a badge. Not police, not federal. Dean raised his voice, low and hard. Step away from the boy. Now. The man turned slowly, calm, as if they were discussing parking violations. Mid-40s, sharp jaw, trimmed beard, and eyes that didn't blink. His badge flicked shut. You must be Officer Walker. I was just speaking with the boy about his recovery. Dean didn't lower his gun. You're not hospital staff, and you're not cleared to be here. The man smiled faintly. My credentials allow me to move between agencies. The boy is part of an ongoing inquiry that transcends local authority. Dean stepped inside the room. Bramble positioned himself in front of Ethan. The man's eyes flicked down to the dog. Interesting, he said. I thought they decommissioned that model. Dean kept his weapon steady. You're going to back out of this room slowly, and you're going to tell me who sent you. The man's smile didn't change, but he raised both hands slowly. Arlington, Officer Walker. That's where this boy belongs. It's where the real story ends. Dean didn't move. You're going to have to shoot me to get him out of this hospital, he said. The man lowered his arms slightly. No, I don't. You've already done exactly what we hoped you would. You found the cabin. You activated the file. You opened the box. Dean blinked. What? That's what Bramble was trained to do. To find the next carrier. To make sure the memory passed along. But the real data, the part we couldn't risk anyone destroying, that's not in some box, officer. It's in the boy. Dean glanced at Ethan. The kid was trembling, eyes locked on Bramble, who had not moved an inch. The man stepped forward. He'll remember, eventually. The body always remembers. The dreams will come. And when they do, he'll come to us willingly. He won't even know why. Dean clenched his jaw. I'm taking him somewhere safe. The man tilted his head. There's no such place. Bramble snarled. A deep, primal sound that stopped the air. The man took one step back. You still think this is about a dog and a scared little boy? He said. It's not. It's about what happens when you build something you can't fully control. Bramble's protocol was never designed for protection. It was designed for survival, strategic obedience, predictive loyalty. But loyalty is fragile, officer, especially when memory returns. Dean fired. Not at the man. At the ceiling, inches above his head. The sound was deafening in the tight room. The man flinched, finally, then smiled again. You've made your choice, he said, stepping back into the hallway. Just remember, it's not the only one you'll have to make. Dean moved quickly, holstering his weapon and pulling Ethan off the bed. Get dressed. Now. Ethan's hands trembled. Where are we going? Somewhere they can't find you. Will Bramble come? Dean looked at the dog. Bramble was already at the door. Of course. They slipped through the emergency stairwell, down into the lower levels of the hospital, past laundry carts and storage lockers. Dean knew the building well enough to avoid surveillance. Bramble led the way like he'd memorized the blueprint. They exited through the loading dock and climbed into the back of a delivery van Dean had commandeered from a nearby lot. The lockbox, the file, and the boy, everything that mattered, was inside. Dean drove without headlights through the back roads. Ethan sat beside him in silence. Bramble rode in the back, eyes fixed on the shadows behind them. After an hour, Ethan finally spoke. He's still out there, isn't he? Dean didn't answer. Ethan reached out, placing a hand on Bramble's neck. He's not just a dog, is he? Dean looked at him. No, he's the only thing between you and what they built. And we're not going to let them take it back. Snow began to fall as the road narrowed into a switchback path cutting through the Cascade foothills. Dean's hands gripped the wheel tighter as the van climbed, tires crunching over fresh powder. He glanced at Ethan, bundled in an oversized jacket, his face pale but calm. Bramble sat behind them, muscles taut beneath his thick coat, every movement measured, every glance to the rear window deliberate. The cabin came into view just past dawn, hidden behind a thicket of pine and rock. It was old Forest Service property, decommissioned and unlisted. Dean had found it years ago while chasing a fugitive through the backwoods, never thought he'd return with a child, a dog, and the weight of a conspiracy pressing down on his chest. Inside, the air was frigid but clean. Dean got the fire going, setting canned goods and a water purifier on the table. The solar battery flickered to life, powering only a single bulb and a low-band radio. No cell reception. No GPS. Just silence and isolation. Exactly what they needed. Ethan sat near the fire with a blanket draped over his shoulders. Bramble pressed close beside him. The dog had barely left the boy's side since they'd left the hospital, his eyes scanning the room in quiet vigilance. Dean watched them for a long moment before stepping outside onto the porch. The snow had thickened, falling in wide, slow flakes that softened the landscape and muffled sound. He pulled his jacket tighter and turned on the encrypted radio. Static. Then a faint voice crackled through. They're off-grid. Last ping was 30 miles south. Orders are unchanged. Retrieve the boy. Neutralize the dog. Dean's blood froze. He switched it off and stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. They're coming, he said quietly. Ethan looked up. His hands clutched Bramble's fur. Do they want to hurt me? Dean knelt beside him. They want to find something inside you, but we're not going to let them. Bramble stood slowly, moving to the window. His ears twitched once, twice. Then he growled low, sustained and certain. Dean moved to the weapons bag he'd hidden in the floorboards, pulling out a sidearm and an old hunting rifle. He handed the pistol to Ethan. "Just in case. Don't point it at anything unless you're afraid." Ethan stared at the weapon, then at Dean. "I'm already afraid." Dean nodded. "Then use that. Stay alert. Bramble will protect you." Outside, the wind picked up. The forest had grown too quiet. Then a crack. A branch snapping under weight, not far. Dean killed the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness, lit only by the fire's flicker. Bramble moved to the door, growling now in a sharp rhythm. He wanted out. "No," Dean said. "Not yet." But Bramble turned, looked at Ethan, then back at Dean and moved to the back door. "He's leading them away," Dean realized. Bramble nudged the door open with his nose. Snow swept in across the threshold. Dean grabbed his collar. "No, Bramble. You stay with him." But the dog looked at him, eyes bright with something almost human. A choice. Not out of duty, but something deeper. Understanding. "Go," Ethan whispered. "Be careful." Bramble bolted into the storm. Dean turned back to Ethan. "Come with me. We go now." They moved through the hidden crawl space under the cabin floor, pushing out into a hollow beneath the rocks. From there, Dean led Ethan up a narrow goat trail toward a lookout point he'd scouted years ago somewhere high, defensible and hard to spot from above. Behind them, gunfire cracked through the forest. Just once. Then silence. They reached the ridge as the sun cut through the clouds. Dean crouched beside Ethan, rifle ready, eyes on the tree line below. Then movement. Ah. 3 figures in tactical black swept through the snow, weapons drawn. They moved methodically, checking for prints. Then one of them stopped, turned his head. And Bramble exploded from the trees like a shadow with teeth. He went straight for the lead man, jaws locking on his arm, dragging him down. The others shouted, opened fire, but Bramble twisted, using the man's body as cover, forcing them to hesitate. Then he broke off, running in wide arcs, baiting them deeper into the woods. Dean watched through the scope, breath held. He's not fighting them. He's drawing them away. Minutes passed. Then silence again. Dean scanned the forest. No figures. No dog. Ethan sat beside him, eyes wide. "He's okay, right?" Dean looked down the trail, then at the boy. "I don't know." They waited another hour, breath misting in the cold air. Then at the edge of the trees a shape emerged, limping slightly, covered in snow and blood. "Bramble." He made it. Ethan ran to him, arms flung around his neck. Bramble let out a low huff, tail flicking once. Dean knelt beside them, one hand on Bramble's side. "You're not just a dog," he whispered. "You're the reason he's alive." And Bramble, battered and bleeding, licked the boy's cheek once and laid down beside him. The storm had passed. But they all knew it wasn't over. The sun hung low behind the ridgeline, casting long amber shadows across the snow as Dean tightened the last bolt on the radio relay. The makeshift antenna crackled softly, spitting fragments of signal into the cold mountain air. Bramble lay nearby, resting but awake, his bandaged leg curled beneath him. Ethan sat wrapped in 2 jackets, silent beside the fire, staring into the flames as if waiting for something only he could feel. They had survived the night, but Dean knew survival was only the first step. The storm hadn't ended, it had only shifted. There were still questions that clawed beneath the surface, questions the files from the lockbox hadn't answered. Like why Ethan still whispered names in his sleep. Why he kept drawing the same door with the number E7 scrawled above it. Why Bramble responded every time the boy spoke in his dreams. Dean turned the dial on the radio slowly, isolating the frequency Hawthorne had written down on the back of a photo. A single word, Alder. She hadn't explained what it meant, only that if they reached it, someone would be listening. Static gave way to a faint tone. Then a voice. "Alder, go ahead." Dean leaned in. "This is Officer Dean Walker, Elk Hollow PD. I have a child in protective custody. Name Ethan Moore. accompanied by a Kane unit previously assigned to Sentinel Initiative. We've been compromised. I'm requesting a secure relay and answers. There was a pause. Then the voice returned. Calm. Male. Older. Coordinates received. You're not far. Bring the boy. Bring the dog. And bring the truth. The signal cut. Dean stared at the radio. No name. No confirmation. Just trust. He turned to Ethan. We're going. Bramble rose slowly, favoring his side but steady. Ethan helped him up, fingers tangled in his fur. They moved through the trees for 3 hours, cutting across ridges and frozen streams, until they reached a clearing bordered by collapsed stone markers. At the center stood an old ranger station, half swallowed by ivy and thyme. But the antenna tower behind it pulsed faint blue light. Someone was waiting. Inside, a single man sat at a long table, back straight, hands clasped. Late 50s, white beard, military posture. He rose slowly as they entered. You're Dean Walker, he said. And you are? My name doesn't matter. What does matter is that I was there when Sentinel began. I designed the ECO imprint system. I helped turn children into hard drives, and I've been running from that mistake ever since. He looked at Ethan. And now he's remembering. Dean stepped forward. What's in his head? The man gestured for them to sit. Ethan is more than a child with hidden data. He is the failsafe. Dr. Marin embedded cognitive locks tied to Bramble's scent, voice, even his presence. The boy was never meant to be a courier. He was meant to be a key, one that only unlocks when the right soul stands beside him. And the files? Encrypted shards. The memories manifest in dreams, symbols, drawings. But when he reaches cognitive phase 5, it all surfaces. Names, bank codes, war crimes. Enough to bring down entire chains of command. Dean shook his head. He's a child. I know. That's why she gave him Bramble. To guide him through it. The man turned to the dog. You're not just a protector. You're a memory vault. You were trained to respond to what Ethan doesn't know he remembers. Bramble watched him without blinking. The man continued. There's a choice to make now. You can keep running. Or we can activate the final protocol. Transfer the composite memory. Expose everything. But it will cost him. The headaches. The visions. The trauma. It won't be reversible. Dean looked at Ethan. The boy didn't flinch. I want to help. If it stops them. If it means no one else has to lose their mom and dad. Dean felt something tighten in his chest. Then Bramble stepped forward, placing his paw on the boy's knee. No command. Just connection. The man nodded. Place your hand on him and say the phrase. What phrase? Ethan closed his eyes, then spoke softly. Echo, return. A pulse of heat filled the room. Bramble stiffened. Ethan gasped, his pupils dilated. Then he slumped forward into Dean's arms. It's done, the man said. Give him time. Dean held the boy, Bramble beside them, his head resting on Ethan's shoulder. Outside, the wind rose. 6 months later, the world changed. A leak of encrypted files rocked private defense contractors. Names were named, accounts frozen, black sites exposed. A congressional hearing followed. Some denied everything, others vanished. And through it all, no one ever found the source. In a quiet ranch near the base of Mount Hood, a boy ran barefoot through the grass, a dog racing behind him, chasing a red rubber ball. A woman watched from the porch. Sarah Donahue, child trauma specialist, now Ethan's legal guardian, carefully chosen and deeply trusted. Dean stood beside her, watching the horizon. He had resigned from the force. Some wounds don't heal in uniform, but every weekend he drove 2 hours to visit, not because he had to, because family chooses you back. As the sun dipped low, Bramble ran back toward the house, ball in his mouth, tail wagging. Ethan followed, laughing. You still remember? Ethan asked. Bramble looked up. Always. And in that moment there was no more program, No more control. Just a boy, a dog, and a man who finally understood what it meant to protect something with everything you are. Not by order, but by love. Thank you for listening to this unforgettable journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or left you thinking, please consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. And don't forget to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next story.